Actually, our project is trying to change the perception towards architecture on using the swamp as the basis, or the bog, or mire, or wetland, as a springboard to bring in all the organic materials and the environment into the analysis of the turf house. So, like Tinna is saying, this 1,000 years old, 1,100 years old architecture in the Icelandic context comes from that platform. But so far, the approach towards the turf house has mainly been on the basis of architectural history. Where people are describing the forms. They, of course, describe the materials that contain, the turf house. But we, on the other hand, using the swamp as a platform, we like to bring what is in the swamp into our analysis, and that requires, we think, what we called in our presentation an exploded view. So we actually, we look at it. Of course, we utilize architectural approaches, historical approaches. But at the same time, we argue that we need to bring in more perspectives. For instance, plants and all the disciplines that have dealt with plants. Animals, insects. We need to attend to the microbiome of the swamp that gets transported into the house, and so this is a kind of an exploded view that we are working with, which basically just opens up a very complex phenomenon that the turf house is. And that is sort of our approach to, and as an answer to your question, what is a turf house? We basically argue that it is more than we have so far been told, what it is.
Yeah, I think the turf house gives us a great opportunity to reconnect to the multi-species world of the turf house, and it's, in a way, it's an ecosystem, and it provides us sort of ecosystemic thought that we need to integrate into our sort of everyday life today if we are going to have a future. And so we have a very rich world in the turf house. We have the soil, and that's very sort of great diversity, biodiversity within the soil. We have diversity of temporalities, and we are sort of looking into that also, that decentering sort of anthropocentric time, and there are so many layers that in this post-humanist thought that can be sort of looked into in the turf house. So, and we're also looking into how the turf house evolves through time, because we can see species turnover all the time. So turf house demands that you care. You need to constantly care for the plants and the soil. If not, it will collapse on you. So so it's like we have these notions of not just multi-species world, but we have also different temporalities, time, space, and this sort of interspecies relations that we really care for now. Not just to sort of understand the relationship between the species, but also between the human and the non-humans. And that also involves stones, of course, lichens and moss, and lichens, moss are also sensors, for environmental change. So the turf house is a very smart house in a way, also we can say that. And I think we we kind of approach it as brain to poke and sort of get into some kind of communication with. Mm-hmm. And we have learned a lot from our companion the turf house in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is precisely what Tinna is saying. The material matter organisms around the turf house, in the turf house, they are actually our companions. And so one of the things that we are working with is this term that Donna Haraway introduced of symbiotic processes, basically, meaning that what we contend that the turf house is actually not only an edifice well framed with very clear boundaries, but rather in a very complex context where humans are building. That's the conventional story or approach of how to approach the architecture like a turf house. But it is more than that. It's basically we are in a collaboration, consciously or unconsciously, with a very large frame, basically the whole world and what is in it. So and the whole world is in the swamp, is in the turf house. So we are in this making with space. In these relationships within the turf house, both in the process, of course, in building it, but also when it comes to living with it. And so that is one sort of avenue that we are exploring.
But also because this is such an interdisciplinary project, we are anthropologists, we have architect, and then we have an artist who basically has extensive experience of the turf house, living there since he was a child, and then we work with microbiologists and botanists, and we will include other specialists, fungi specialists, and so we are putting together a lab with all different kind of professionals. Sort of to not just to expand this exploded view, but also to understand the relationship between all these different species, and also what can we learn from them? How do they survive? How do they react in between themselves? And so that's also something that we want to embrace in the turf house. So the turf house, this ecosystem, has never been part of the turf house history, or because Icelanders are brought up, being shameful towards the turf house, and that's something also that we need to look into, like what the loss of the turf house, what does it mean, and that is something that we will sort of study as well in this project, because the turf house is until 1930 or
1950 or 60.
Yeah. So at the same time that Icelanders started to drain the swamp, Icelanders, destroyed the turf houses at the same time. In the 1940s, the last turf house in Reykjavik was destroyed in the 1980s. So it's been a long story of. And this actually brings up this latter section of this term that we are basically making in which we call Turfiction, where we are actually combining on one hand, the term turf with fiction, whatever that is, but combining it. We are actually suggesting that there is a need for a fictional approach, within this whole project. On one hand, because of the thing that Tinna just mentioned, is that this architecture was eradicated; it was exterminated in the 20th century. So Icelanders, for example, they don't live in turf houses anymore, but we have only a handful of them still available mainly as part of museums and heritage institutions.
So dealing with turf houses has become this speculative terrain, where we are dealing with archaic, disappeared architecture. So that's one thing. But another thing is also this need of fiction or imaginaries, if you like, in order to really comprehend and connect and create new narratives between the different sectors of the exploded view of the turf house. So that's sort of one angle of why we are introducing fiction as a vital element in this project.
Yeah, and also because there are components within the turf house that we should integrate into our lives, and at the moment we are also drafting models and some kind of prototypes that we could actually integrate into modern architecture that are rooted from the turf house. So that's also the fictional part of the project as well. So we go forward with some of the knowledge of the turf house into our future.